The year was 2006. Just outside Delhi, in Noida's Sector 31, there was a small village called Nithari. Thousands of people passed through that area every day without giving it a second thought. It was the kind of place where children played in narrow lanes, shopkeepers knew their customers by name, and families lived simple lives. From the outside, everything looked normal, but hidden behind the walls of a large bungalow known as D5, a nightmare was quietly unfolding. A nightmare so horrifying that when the truth finally came out, it shocked not only India but the entire world. At first, nobody noticed anything unusual. One child disappeared. The family searched everywhere. Relatives were called, neighbors were questioned. The local police were informed, but no one could find the child. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Eventually, life moved on. People assumed the child had run away or been kidnapped by someone passing through the area. It was tragic, but sadly not unheard of. Then another child disappeared, and then another, and another. Slowly, fear began spreading through Nithari. Parents started calling their children home before sunset. Mothers became afraid to let their kids walk alone, even for a few minutes. Every missing child seemed to come from poor families living near the same area. Every family had the same story. Their son or daughter had gone outside and never returned. Yet despite the growing number of disappearances, nothing seemed to change. Complaints were filed, questions were asked, but answers never came. As the months passed, rumors began spreading through the village. Some people believed a child trafficking gang was operating nearby. Others thought the children had been taken across state borders. A few even started whispering about supernatural forces. The truth was so unimaginable that nobody dared consider it. Sometimes the human mind rejects reality when reality is too terrifying to accept. Then, on a cold December morning in 2006, everything changed. A father searching for his missing daughter found himself standing near the backside of Bungalow D5. What he noticed there would eventually lead investigators to one of the most horrifying discoveries in Indian criminal history. Hidden near a drain behind the house were objects that did not belong there. At first glance, they looked like pieces of garbage. But when police officers looked more closely, they realized they were staring at something far worse: human remains. The moment that discovery was made, panic spread across the entire area. Police rushed to the scene, the location was sealed, forensic teams arrived. What they uncovered over the following days would leave even experienced investigators struggling to process what they were seeing. The deeper they dug, the darker the mystery became. Because this was no longer the story of one missing child. This was the story of many. As investigators began searching the area around the bungalow, they expected to find evidence connected to a single missing person case. Instead, what they discovered sent shockwaves through the entire country. More remains were found, then more, and then even more. Every few feet seemed to reveal another horrifying clue. Officers who had arrived expecting a routine investigation suddenly found themselves standing in the middle of what looked like a nightmare. News spread rapidly. Television crews rushed to Nithari. Villagers gathered outside police barricades. Families of missing children stood there praying that the remains being recovered did not belong to their loved ones. But deep down, many of them already knew the answer. The focus of the investigation quickly shifted toward the bungalow itself. The house belonged to Moninder Singh Pander, a wealthy businessman who often traveled for work. Living there with him was his domestic servant, Surinder Kohli. Until that point, both men had lived relatively unnoticed lives. But now, they had become the center of one of India's biggest criminal investigations. Police began questioning them, searching the property, and examining every detail of their daily routines. The question everyone wanted answered was simple. How could so many children disappear from the same area without anyone noticing what was happening? As investigators dug deeper, disturbing allegations began emerging. Witnesses described seeing children near the house before they vanished. Families remembered their sons and daughters playing in nearby streets. Piece by piece, a horrifying picture started forming. Every new discovery seemed worse than the last. Every new statement raised even more questions. The nation watched in disbelief as the story dominated headlines day after day. Then came the confessions. According to investigators at the time, Surinder Kohli began describing events that were almost impossible to comprehend. The details were so disturbing that newspapers and television channels struggled with how much information they should even publish. People who followed the case often said that reading the investigation reports felt like reading the plot of a horror movie rather than a real criminal case. Many officers involved later admitted that it was one of the most traumatic investigations they had ever witnessed. Public anger exploded. Across India, people demanded answers. How had so many children gone missing without authorities taking immediate action? Why had families been ignored when they first reported disappearances? Why did it take so long for anyone to connect the dots? These questions became just as important as the murders themselves. For many people, the Nithari case was not only about the crimes, it was also about a system that had failed vulnerable families again and again. The victims mostly came from poor households. Their parents did not have political influence. They did not have powerful connections. Many had spent months desperately searching for their children while being told to wait, be patient, or assume that the child would eventually return. Looking back, some families believed that if the first few complaints had been taken seriously, many lives might have been saved. Whether that is true or not remains a painful question that still haunts the case today. Soon, arrests were made and court proceedings began. The evidence, the confessions, and the discoveries from the crime scene convinced many people that justice would move swiftly. Newspapers called it one of the most horrifying criminal cases in modern Indian history. Television debates ran for hours. Everyone seemed certain about how the story would end. But that was only the beginning. Over the following years, the case moved through India's legal system. Multiple trials were conducted. Death sentences were handed down in several cases. Families of victims believed that justice was finally within reach. For a moment, it seemed as though the chapter was coming to a close. The people accused of the crimes had been identified. The courts had spoken. The punishment had been decided. Then everything changed. Appeals were filed. Legal arguments were raised. Questions emerged about how evidence had been collected and whether proper procedures had been followed during the investigation. Lawyers challenged various aspects of the case. Slowly, what had once appeared straightforward became increasingly complicated. Courtrooms became battlegrounds where every piece of evidence was examined, challenged, and debated. Years passed. The children never returned, the families never stopped grieving, and the legal battles continued. Then came one of the biggest twists in the entire story. Decades after the crimes first shocked the nation, higher courts began reviewing the convictions. Judges examined the evidence once again. Witness statements were reconsidered. Questions that many people thought had already been answered suddenly returned. Eventually, decisions were issued that stunned large sections of the public. Convictions that many believed were settled were overturned. Serious doubts were raised about parts of the prosecution's case. For the families of victims, the developments reopened old wounds. They had spent years believing the mystery had been solved. Now they were being told that things might not be as simple as they once seemed. The legal system had spoken again, but instead of bringing closure, it created new questions. And that is what makes the Nithari killings so haunting even today. Most crime stories eventually reach a point where everyone agrees on what happened. The evidence is clear, the verdict is accepted, and history moves on. But Nithari is different. Even after years of investigations, confessions, trials, appeals, and court judgments, debates still continue. People still argue about responsibility. People still question the investigation. People still wonder whether every truth was ever fully uncovered. What began as a missing child case in a small village eventually became one of the most disturbing criminal investigations India has ever seen. It exposed failures in policing, raised difficult questions about justice, and left behind grieving families who are still searching for answers. The bungalow at D5 became infamous across the country. The name Nithari became permanently associated with horror. And perhaps the most unsettling part of the entire story is this. For the families who lost their children, court judgments and legal debates can never change one simple fact. The children who disappeared never came home. And for many of those families, that unanswered pain remains the real ending of the story.